Okay, so we're live. I'm very, very excited about this session tonight. I think this is one that's going to bring a lot of value to a lot of people watching. A big core part of Semrush's business is search advertising, which of course is Google Ads paid search. Uh, Tonight we have Brad Geddes with us, who is actually one of the authorities on the subject from a long, long time ago. I've actually known that name from back when I was a junior doing PPC, and I'm very excited to hear what he has to say about advanced ad testing, which actually isn't just for someone who is running very, very large enterprise campaigns. The methodology that he's going to present to us, I think, will apply to anyone regardless of campaign size. So I think this is one that'll bring most value to most people, and I'm very excited to have it. We're going to spend the next few minutes or so waiting for more people to join because we just launched. Until then, I would like to informally introduce our participants. Like I said, we have Brad Geddes, we have Nava Hopkins, and we also have Aaron Levy. They're coming from different parts of the states, I believe. Brad, where are you coming from?
Washington, D.C.
Okay, East Coast, Washington, D.C., an exciting place. Okay, and Nava and Aaron, I believe you're in Massachusetts?
Yep, Boston.
I'm in Philadelphia. We have the Philadelphia Phillies mascot behind me.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, you mean the brick house, the brick walls?
Exactly.
Aaron was explaining earlier that Philadelphia is full of brick-walled houses, so I guess that's part of it. I thought it was a broken bell. Okay. Anyway, so we're having people from all over the world join. So I'm interested. So wherever you're coming from, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're coming from. The format for this session today is going to be Brad doing his great presentation, which is going to be pretty quick. It'll be about 20 minutes or so. Afterwards, after the presentation, we're going to have a time for questions and answers where this panel of experts that we have over here, as well as myself, will be addressing anything that you have to ask. So in the YouTube chat, feel free to contribute to that, and we'll take it from there. Okay. I just realized that it's raining. I don't know if that's coming in, but it just started raining really bad, and I think it's might be coming into the audio. This never happened before in any of my sessions. I'm coming from Tel Aviv, Israel. We don't get too much rain. But when it rains, of course. So, yes. Okay, so I guess right now we have people from the Czech Republic, New York, India. We have a Floridian. Actually, I'm originally from Florida, so it's great to have a fellow Sunshine State member in here as well. Colorado, Italy. It's nice. Pakistan. Okay, so that's where Zeem's from. That was my guess, actually. When he said it was 10 p.m. over there, my guess was Pakistan or India. Because no one really lives in the middle of Russia, which also has that time zone. Excellent. Okay, so in a bit we're going to get started. Like I said before, we're thrilled to have this panel. This is probably one of the most experienced panel of people I've ever had. To do a formal introduction, well, the presentation is going to be given by Brad Geddes. He has been involved with PPC for over 20 years, which is about as old as PPC is. He is a co-founder of Ad Analysis, which is a PPC recommendation engine for Google Ads and also Bing Ads that makes day-to-day management of your accounts easy. And personally, I'm very honored to have Brad. When I first got into PPC, actually, the second time I got into PPC, the first time was about 20 years ago as well. The second time I got into PPC, after that little brief flirtation I had with it, in the early 2000s, I kind of really fell in love with the profession. And one of the first books I read was a book by Brad Geddes. So it's very nice to be presenting with someone whose book I read. It's really quite an honor. Also joining us is Nava Hopkins, who is part of the customer success and thought leadership team at WordStream. That's where she empowers small businesses and also agencies which serve them to win with Google, Bing, and Facebook. She's been in digital marketing since 2008, and she fell in love with PPC back in 2012 and never looked back, and I don't blame her. I second that motion very, 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 very well. She's actually got some experience with Brad. She's going to be speaking with him at PubCon in Florida and also SMX Munich. So, I think it's, very nice to see the two of them together again. As they are commonly found, at conferences around the world. Aaron Levy, he oversees the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest teams at Elite SEM, which is a full-service digital marketing agency. He's been in search advertising since he was given the keys to the car, managing SEM for a Fortune 100 chemical company in college, and he also hasn't looked back since. And those are other feelings that I could also kind of second. If you're doing online marketing, if you're doing PPC, it's not until you have what I call campaign ownership, which I think is what Aaron's referring to when he says giving the keys to the car. It's not until you actually are responsible for the numbers that the ads are producing that you actually really feel like it's really yours. And when that happens, you take it to heart. You know, you wake up in the morning and that's all you think about. You go to bed at night and all you think about is how your campaigns are running. Because with PPC, things move so fast that you get that high, and it's like, and it means something else when it's yours, when you're actually running it yourself, as opposed to what I see some agencies do, or large companies that have large activities. They kind of, you know, divide it up across a lot of people, and not one person, except for maybe the manager, has the feeling of ownership. So ownership is something very important with team management. So enough about the introductions. I think it's about time to go ahead and start presenting. So Brad, I'll give you the keys to the car, so to speak. You may share your screen and begin.
All right, so it should be shared. So yes, just need to make it big so we can all read it. Yes. Do we see the screen?
Yeah, I see it. Looks good.
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing it, but all right. So long as you're seeing it, then that's fine.
Yeah,
all right.
Oh, you should hide where it says Google Hangouts is sharing your screen. That's all.
Oh,
not a big deal.
I can go hide that.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what happens when you're using two computers, right?
Yeah, and yes, so Google, yeah, and he's a Google Ads expert, one of the best. Google Hangouts. I mean, who uses Google Hangouts?
All right. So I'm going to glance over on occasion so I can actually see what's on the screen. But so what we're going to talk about is ads and ad testing. And then we're going to stop and do some commentary with Nava and Aaron and Joel. And then at the end, we'll come back to some more general questions. So when we think about, you know, what makes a great ad, right? One of our first things we think about is how we construct it. You know, so our headline is usually related to our ad group. And then we've got a benefit or call to action. And then we have this third line right now, which is hanging out a little bit because sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll get into a little bit about that. This is a fairly common construction though for ads. So one of the first things though is we think of paid search. We have the group of people who are fantastic at math. Then the people who are great at ideas. And while there are people great at both, they're fairly rare. So what often happens, we have to think about ad inspiration, right? Where do we pull ideas from? Whether it's social, I mean, Twitter used to be fantastic for this because its length was the length of an ad. They were identical. You've got interviews, of course, with customers. You have competitive research. So step one is often, you know, going outside of your little bubble to say, where do we pull in information? Now, second, right, is we have to think about who our competitors are and how we differentiate them. Now, what's interesting is these are your competitors by impressions, but not necessarily for clicks. So we have a great example here, actually. So you here is at Alice's. Our number one impression competitor is WordStream. But in reality, right, WordStream is for agencies managing small businesses and small business accounts, right? We are more for people who are spending 25,000, 100,000, a million plus. So we compete for impressions. We don't actually want each other's clicks. So this is often where we think about the ads. We're saying, how do we make sure we're different from them so someone can self-select correctly? In fact, funny enough, our third competitor is Semrush. Right, so we've got all our competitors right here by an impression basis. Semrush, we're a subscriber, fantastic research tool. Not going to manage your campaigns for you. And so that's where often our first step is saying who's actually a competitor and how to make ourselves different. Now, then next, we want to dig into everyone's ads, right, and say, where should we start with ideas? So this is a company who specializes in trademarks. So when we look at, hey, filing a trademark, and you just want to do some searches, right, for your top keywords, and then say, what's good and bad? So funny enough, this is for London. And the first thing that jumps off is there's $signs in these ads. All right, so we didn't even get the currency right. Second, wow, there's some people doing some really good structured snippets. Sometimes they're hard to be creative with structured snippets. So when someone does a good job, you might want to copy that a little bit, right? In other places, we see prices everywhere. So we might want to think, all right, how do we play the prices? And so we can make our list, right, of here's how we differentiate ourselves from others, but then what should we focus on in our testing based upon, in this case so far, right, being different from impression competitors who aren't true competitors, right, in cases, and other times saying how do we localize better than other people because localization is very poor here. So, that's some high level stuff. So when we think, Aaron, Nava, Joel, when you start with your competitor research and ad ideas, where do you turn?
Go ahead.
Yeah, do you want to call on us? We'll go by name. I'm first in everyone's phone, so I get to go first. So at least for me and Brad, it's interesting the ads that you picked. I'm curious how many of them were on the same search results page. So for me, competitive research in SEM is important to find areas where you differentiate yourself from being a commodity product versus a real product. So you think about trademark registration. To a degree, it's a commodity product. You either get it right or wrong. So those that are promoting price where they're not winners doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What I tend to do is look at the messaging that people have on their site. I also really like looking into social profiles to see where they're the most active, seeing if they respond to customer complaints on Twitter or Facebook, seeing what they're saying in their ads. We also love using tools like, I never know if it's right or wrong, Semrush or Semrush. We're in the States, so I'm going to call it Semrush because I want to. But what we like to look for is ad consistency. So if we see a competitor that has had the same-ish ad running for 180 days, 365 days, that ad clearly works. Whereas if we see a competitor has 1,000 new ads that are brand new, that probably means they changed their entire strategy. So whatever they were doing before isn't working. So what we like to do is see where everyone's the same and then figure out where our product can be a little bit different.
Okay. Navi, you want to go ahead or should I go? No, actually, my name's Jay, but you're left to right and my icons.
And then we'll go down the center. So much like Brad, I begin the conversation with SERP analysis, looking not only is it a transactional search result page, does Google and Bing actually think that it's worth serving ads here, but also is the cohort a reasonable cohort to be serving in. Another thing that I really encourage folks to think about is, are you laying out an ad that will be interesting when everyone else is being boring? So if you see that there are particular queries that folks are just not investing the time to be interesting, to be engaging, to speak to the actual pain point of the user, I'm much more interested in investing effort there than I am on a page where, even if I love the page, there's 3 other really interesting, compelling ads that are aligned with that prospect. So it really comes down to, where can I make the biggest bang? And is the page actually worth investing the effort on?
Joel, you're still muted yourself.
Oh, and it's
you're
just
trying to.
Yeah,
There we go.
that makes a lot of sense, and it's actually something that I follow as well. But I do want to actually add something that long before I even look at, if I'm starting a new activity, and I'm at the point where I'm ready to start working on ads, I actually avoid looking at anyone else's ads before I come up with a few ideas. The reason being is that I feel that, like, if I don't look what other people do first, I'm going to come at it with different angles. If I start with researching what everyone else does, my first reaction, of course, will be when I look at people that are really click competitors, people who are in the same market as me, as well as advertising the same keywords. I'm going to start thinking like they do because they're going to kind of pollute my thoughts a bit. So the first thing I do is I don't look at competitor ads, just so that way I might come up with some new fresh ideas that is outside of that sphere, especially if it's in a new vertical that I'm just starting to advertise. The second thing I do is I actually do look for weaknesses. I look for like some very, very like, as from searches that are maybe very potent, very impactful, that I could write better ads for than my advertising competitors, which they're not doing, probably because they haven't put them in their own groups, probably because they haven't like made tailor ads, you know, for those particular searches. So if so what I know is that if it's a very powerful search term, if it's something that's very, very competitive, if I see that, I'll be like, wow, that's an area I could win, because I know I could write more relevant ads for it. And it could very well be as well that I could actually maybe make a better funnel for it after the click. So that's my 3 cents.
It's only polluting if they're writing bad ads.
Excuse me?
So one more time, Nava.
I was saying it's only polluting your thoughts if they're writing bad ads.
No, but maybe their ads. You're right, because if they're up there, if it's a competitive industry and they're advertising consistently, it means it's working for them. So those ads are good. But you know, but maybe I want to set the benchmark a bit higher. Maybe I could come up with something that they never thought of because I'm coming at it with completely fresh eyes. You know what I mean? And by the way, it's a risk. Like chances are I won't. I'm being truthful. Chances are I won't, but I want to at least think about it before I see what they did.
Yeah, so when everyone places starts actually talking to the sales reps to say, what do you say that closes the deal, right? Because they're the ones who actually talk the most to customers, and they have different ideas than the marketing team does. So actually, that's my favorite conversation to have.
That, or if you can get their call logs recorded and put it into a word cloud and see what words pop up that you wouldn't think of otherwise, it's gold.
Or also concerns as well. It's like you speak to customer service, hear what complaints people have, and you could put in, you know, like in the description of the ad something that addresses that to relieve whatever anxiety people might have with purchasing this particular product or service.
All right, so we can come back to this. So let's keep moving. So when we think about testing, all right, there's 2 testing types. We've got single ad group testing, which means we're testing in an ad group to find the best ad for that targeting method, be it a keyword, an audience, whatever targeting method. We then have multi-ad group testing. This is where we're testing an idea across multiple ad groups. Both of these have their place, which we're going to get to. So multi sometimes confuses people, right? What we're basically saying is, hey, we've got 2 ideas. We're going to put them in 2 ads in X number of ad groups. It could be 10, it could be 10,000. That's all we're looking at. So when you think about where you want to start, right? Multi is about customer insight, because you're finding the best ad across a large swath of targeting, right? It could be your entire brand campaign ad groups. It could be a product set 1. It could be something else. So when you've got market research questions, right? Price sensitivity, call to action differences, luxury versus commodity cheap, you know, that's really where the multi is good, right? You're finding it overall it's better, but in any one ad group, it might be worse, right? Because we're looking at the average says it's better overall. So single, right, ad group testing is best for brands. If you have an ad group and something gets wrong, you get fired, right? That's where single is, because you want the best ad possible there. And those ad groups that just do really, really well, that you don't want an average to work with. Now, where multi is great, right? If you're a small account, you may never get enough data in an ad group to test, so you can aggregate information together. It's better for templated ads. If you go make 100,000 ads with templates, you've already got multi-ad group testing set up. You just have to read the data, right? So neither one is better or worse. They have different places and times for how you do your testing. So this is how we started at the beginning. Do you guys have different ways that you test or like to think about your segments? Or how would you definitely segment out different ad tests? So we'll do reverse order. So Nava, why don't you start this time instead of double A Aaron over here?
So in terms of tests, I make folks pick what variable they're going to look for. So a lot of folks will jump right to the ad without considering the landing page that's going to follow. So when you're looking at the ad test, when you're looking at the performance, we always make sure that we build in the time to figure out not only is the ad copy right, but also landing page and swapping those out. The other piece that we look to is if there is a point of differentiation that we really want to test, we'll always focus much more on headline testing than we will description line testing, just because whatever you throw in the description, having the descriptions is great. It doesn't actually matter so much what's in there, just so long as you have them. Whereas the headlines, you can really see, is a bit of copy going to move the needle? In terms of templates versus just an overall idea, it genuinely does depend on the client. So in our space, working with SMBs, working with the agencies that serve them, we live with that problem all the time, where you may not necessarily have millions of impressions to work with and hundreds of thousands of clicks. You're instead working with a much more controlled data set. So it's a lot more about what is the potential for this seemingly anecdotal positive result, and then coming in with our aggregates to help empower them.
Okay.
Joel?
So what I do is, well, first of all, like what I do is I divide, like let's say I'm advertising, let's say, and I've actually done this before, a website that sold beach gear, like beach chairs, beach umbrellas, beach towels, and so on. The first thing I'll do is I'll segment like the types of ads based on all those different categories. The one I'll pay attention to the most is going to be the ad group to pay attention to the most is going to be the one that actually gets the majority of the traffic. For the beach chairs campaign, it would actually be people searching for beach chairs without any real modifier. And then to get more data to help me understand what works for the other groups as far as chairs go, I'll then aggregate things such as descriptions and call to actions. I'll aggregate them to get more data. But then sometimes I'll take it with a grain of salt and I'll see how certain groups have differentiators. Like, for example, with beach chairs by themselves, all across the board, and also with beach gear all across the board, the call to actions are generally going to be the same. If you're looking for buying beach gear, you know, like whether the call to action be like get yours to get like buy now, you know, fast shipping, like fast free 2-day shipping, order now, or so on. That's going to work generally for people in the same market, but certain things like descriptions might not. Like if it's chairs and people in a description like be cool and relax at the beach versus easy to move portable chairs, those descriptions aren't going to work as well for, let's say, the umbrellas and so on. So what I do is I aggregate by the category, and I kind of like go in more granular or less depending on what the category is. And it kind of works very well for me. But the thing I do pay attention for the most, by the way, is going to be the one that is kind of the one that takes the cake for the campaign, which is because all the time whenever you're running campaigns, you see for each category, there's a few groups that are by far driving the most traffic. So I focus on those, and then I trickle the results down towards the next. So,
you're all very smart people. There's elements of what both of you said that I really love. Nava, I love that you mentioned, I hate saying a funnel because marketing's more complicated than that, but we'll go with funnel. That you're dealing with the whole customer relationship funnel, that ad testing is certainly what you see on the SERP, but it's a customer experience. And if the ad that you're testing has nothing to do with the landing page that you're running, then what's the point? And Joel, as you said, thinking about customer intent and grouping, where if someone's making a big purchase, you know, fast shipping might not matter because they're planning for it and they need it later. Who knows? From, you know, think about what Brad said of multi-ad group versus single ad group. What we'll usually do is, I'll call them intent pools rather than ad groups, where you think of where in the not a marketing funnel they sit, whether it's top, bottom, consideration, evaluation, reviews, whatever, and we'll group them that way. And we tend to do multi-ad group testing most of the time and sort of squish the data up. But what we'll usually do is look for outliers. So if one ad wins overall, but another ad wins for the rainbow umbrella reviews ad group, then okay, we know that for our reviews, maybe this message that works for everywhere else doesn't work. And we'll switch it around that way.
Yep. Excellent. Makes sense. So let's talk about metrics, right? One of the harder discussions, right? So when we think about metrics, I can't stand CTR and conversion rate testing. everyone feel free to disagree with me when you've got your chance to speak, right? The problem with something like CTR is that just says, I want the most clicks, even if no one actually looks at my website. And conversion rate, right, says once they get to my site, how often they convert, but ignores how often somebody even clicks to get to the site. So that's the problem with a lot of testing. If I said, hey, ad 1's 10% CTR and ads 2, 20%. Those people go, well, 20% is better than 10. But what you don't have there is ad 1 has a 10% CTR, but a 10% bounce rate. And ad 2 is a 20% CTR and a 50% bounce rate. So ad 1 with the lower CTR actually brings in more good traffic, right? And that's where we think about metrics. One that's useful is just conversion per impression. Right now, this is good in lead generation when you say, hey, my ad has this many impressions, it got this many conversions. So every time it's displayed, this is my chance of getting a conversion from that, including CTR and conversion. So this is the potential amount of conversions that exist. So every time your ad is displayed, you have a chance of a conversion. Now, that's good in lead gen or good when you don't have variable sale amounts, right? But you would never want to use this in e-commerce. So and we get into, oops, that's the wrong computer. When we get into e-commerce, right, then we're really thinking about, hey, what's our revenue per impression? Some people do revenue, which is just my revenue divided by impressions. Others, right, want to take out costs. So they'll do, here's my revenue minus ad cost divided by impressions. Assuming your CPCs aren't that different, which in most cases they aren't, but sometimes there's some weird qualitative variables, the numbers usually work out very close. Now, while these are two good metrics that say this is the most potential conversions or potential revenue, they do ignore the advertiser tells you you can't break $35 CPA or you must have a 400% ROAS. So then often we have what we call filter metrics, right? Which says, all right, we must have a 300% return on ad spend. We're testing 4 ads. 2 of them are below that metric, so neither one can be a winner because we would make our client happy by keeping them. Of the 2 that are left, what is the highest revenue per impression? Right? And so, you know, when we think about, we want the most conversions, conversion per impression, right? You want the most visitors, that CTR, but doesn't care how engaged they are, right? If you want the most engaged visitors, then you can make a conversion of 3 minutes on website, 30 seconds right on website, 2 pages visited, and make that a conversion and go right back to conversion per impression metrics. If your only goal is quality score, which should not be most people's goals ever, but if it happens to be just quality score, then that's CTR. CTR is a great tiebreaker metric. You have 2 that are incredibly close. Well, let's pick CTR to build up more audiences and do other things, right? And so I know sometimes there's disagreement here in metrics, but these happen to be my favorites. And what do you use? Do you like it? Do you not? Is there some other filter or something that you definitely take into account? So what is your thoughts on metrics? And I suppose, Joel, it's your time to really go first here.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, it's funny because I was thinking about like questions I have for myself, and I just got done writing. What do you do? What do you prefer if you're having an A/B test and impression to conversion rates equal between the 2 results, but one of them has CTR winning and the other has conversion rate winning? And right after I got done writing that note to myself, you answered it. So that's great. So what do I do actually? It's like no, I do. Well, no, there is there's added benefit to the fact is. What you said is the right thing to do, I believe, but there's added benefits as well because it's not you're actually testing for the best ad and landing page combination if you're testing for impressions to conversions. So, you know, it's not, you kind of, if you are just testing for CTR and you're just testing for conversion rate, you're kind of behaving in a way like the 2 of them are like in vacuums, you know, which by the way is something people do with ad testing alone. Sometimes people just test just headlines and they test just descriptions and they test just the call to actions. And sometimes you have to understand that one can affect the other and you have to find ways to see if that's the case. So to answer your question, like, yes, I normally look at the way you just described it. However, if I'm having trouble with my quality score, I will focus more on the CTR side. I will focus more on the CTR side, not necessarily if it's a deal breaker as well. I mean, if it's a tiebreaker as well, I will do it if the CTR is higher when the conversion rate's only a bit lower. If I'm not able to achieve a very high position, and I kind of, from my experience, feel that making that kind of bias will help me, get a bit better quality score to get better traffic, which will result in more clicks and more sales as well. And then also, by the way, CTR is also better if you're ROI positive, because that means you're going to, get more people into the funnel as well. But that's just my two takes. But of course, you generally kind of hit the nail with the nail with the hammer on the head right away. And I'm talking too much, so I'm stumbling over myself. Okay, so I'll pass on to the next person. I guess that's Aaron.
I guess so. No, I mean, there's not too much to repeat here. We think much the same. Our thought process usually look for CTR winner first, then look at conversion rate winner. If there's no conversion rate and there's a CTR winner, great, we're all done. If they fight, we'll look at conversions per impression. Going back before, we don't want to get a million clicks of people who aren't our targeted customers. So if conversion rate drops for a high CTR ad, then odds are we're not pre-qualifying the people that are clicking on our ads and we're wasting our own money. But if they fight, or if CTR beats CBR and conversion per impression is loosely the same, Brad might not like this answer, but we'll usually lean towards CTR because we expect that the long-term rewards we do get from Google and Quality Score will make up for the conversion loss, and then we can do some CRO on the landing page and figure out if it's our product or our customers, and then reroute from there.
So I'm not going to rehash what you all said because I'm fairly aligned, and I'll throw out there, I appreciate that you put the plug in there for let's not blindly follow Quality Score. Brad's heard me go on that rant many, many times. The one thing I will add is when I'm looking at metrics, a really important component is actually segmenting to see what the click type was, because I'll value click-through rate on and conversion rate on a site link or potentially a price extension a little bit more and get insights for potentially new ads, new ways of expanding the account than I will necessarily a headline click. In addition, kind of going back to Joel's point about average position, if I'm seeing that consistently mobile is winning, I may be a little bit more forgiving of an ad that maybe costs more. It's in that first position because mobile needs the fuel. Whereas if I'm living my best life in position 2.5, 3.8 or so, and desktop is great, I might be a little bit more mindful of crafting copy and being more forgiving of that lower position, because desktop honestly doesn't need to be in the first position. You can get a lot of the same benefits. So it's really just about adapting based off of what the underlying metrics are. But yeah, I'm fully aligned. Click theory can be a little bit of a vanity metric. So
Aaron, you pick metrics however you want to, but what I do want to say is in B2B, that pre-qualification is really important. So sometimes lower CTR is way better because high CTR means you're getting all the bad consumer clicks. You haven't gotten the businesses. Oh, I can see Aaron wants to jump back in here.
Yeah, if we start talking about SQLs per impression, then we can go down a whole different place.
Audiences, guys. Layer the audiences in market.
But then we have to map it back to the sales drop off, and maybe someone needed just help. This is a different conversation. But
you also have to why,
Well, exactly. I mean, to a degree, it's click and conversion quality. We can't just look at the vanity front end metrics. Like if we get a sale, but it's just a customer one time and they'll never come back, that's not worth as much as a loyal customer that we convinced over a long period of time.
Yep. All right, so let's keep going. Rotate. This may be the most contentious setting in all of Google, right? Rotate versus optimize. Oh, wow. So when you set your rotation, right, this says, hey, let's show the best performing ads, which we'll debate what that really means, or, hey, just show my ads evenly. It is worth noting these days, if you choose do not optimize and you use CPA bidding, Google still does optimize, but leaves your setting looking like it's the other one. So there are certain changes now where you may have a setting for one. Based upon your bid strategy, Google changes it behind the scenes. It doesn't tell you anything. So this is why we really, really, really don't like Optimize. In this ad group, all right, this is one ad group. This is 1 week of data, so it's a large account. Their worst, or their ad that wasn't best or worst, it was just the middle ad, right, was served 3 times more often than their best ad, right? And the worst was served at least the least, right, which is good. And we'll see this all the time with Google, that your best ad is actually sometimes the lowest served. When we get into some of the new RSAs, ETAs, which we'll touch on a little bit, what we often see is Google favors CTR, period. If one ad is a higher CTR and it's worse than every other conversion metric, Google will serve the higher CTR one more often. And it's very common to see the pause button increases conversions more than anything else does. So I know Google's got their advice of, hey, just keep making ads or create at least 5 ads. We find, and we look at huge amounts of data, just like WordStream does, when you break 3, Google seems to be like rolling dice for which ad gets served. It seems to no longer be based on any metrics whatsoever. So if you're here watching this webinar, I hope you're doing ad testing, which means you should be using rotate or do not optimize. If you're like saying, we look at this, our ad stuff every 6 months, and we know we need to, we've never gotten to it, then optimize is fine. At least someone's doing something, right? A computer versus you completely ignoring it. So what do you guys think? What do you use? Feel free to disagree. This is the most contentious setting probably in everything Google does.
So I'll throw out there, I'm going to jump in here.
You go for it.
This is another passion point of ours collectively, but also of mine. There comes a point where you can't actually have a reasonable amount of data behind any individual ad. And when you start going beyond 3, you're not going to be able to pick a winner, much less a computer. So WordStream actually did a study of our top customers. We found that the top 25 had an average of 2.7 ads per ad group. And that makes a lot of sense because if you think about Google and what they recommend, they say you should have at least 3. The Google reps will tell you as much. They'll push really hard. In fact, that auto ad after 14 days, which if you all didn't know it was there, the account settings, go opt out of it. They're weird ads. But if the ad isn't, if you haven't opted out of it, one of the reasons that will trigger is because you don't have the 3rd ad. So 3 ads is perfectly fine. But once you go beyond the 3, you're not going to be able to pick a winner, much less the AI. In terms of rotate versus optimize, I agree with you. It makes sense if you have no time whatsoever to manage, optimize is fine. The other use case for optimize is if you are going to be on a push for like quality score or like a lot of the vanity metrics that are like Google first. So when you play with Google's toys, you'll get kudos. And so that's, if you're looking for like a little boost, that can be a reason, but it's not a profitable reason. I'm very much aligned with rotate evenly and then make decisions as opposed to optimize.
I will remove my tinfoil hat for once and look at this from a Google perspective or Bing perspective or both for the next month. So when we do ad rotation, depending on how you have your account built out, there's a lot of decisions that go into optimize that we can't see. So what may very well be happening is that our ad that says 50% off is being served to everybody on mobile with an iPhone 2 who's on Wi-Fi, whereas every ad that's $50 off might be served to everybody who's really rich and has a brand new ad and has been to our site before. So I can't say we've seen this in our accounts because I don't know, because Google doesn't share these things, or at least there's not an easy peasy way to segment them. But what we found is the more segmented the account, the worse it does with rotate or with optimize. So if we have an account where we have single keyword ad groups segmented by device, segmented by audience, segmented by location, segmented by favorite flavor of ice cream, whatever, that's an area where us having control is good because the account is built for control. Whereas if you have an account that's built with putting tinfoil hat back on, Google's best practices, where you have everything smooshed together in one giant campaign, that's an area where rotate tends to do better because it's...
You mean optimize, right?
That one. Yeah, optimize.
Yeah.
Where, Google's making the right decisions for us based on data that we either can't see or haven't made decisions on. So I think there's places for both. We tend to defer towards rotate, but I will say that while optimize looks like it makes decisions a little bit quickly, Google's smart. I don't think that they're that silly that they're just like, we're going to pick the one that spends the most. I'm sure that there's science behind it. We just might not always be able to see it.
Okay, and I'm going to actually agree with Aaron there. I trust rotate a lot. I think that Google's goal with PPC advertising is Google's business model is to make money. And how does Google make money? Well, they make money off of advertisers that make the most of that ad impression, because that's really what they're selling, the ad impression. You're paying per click. Google only gets paid if people click. So I actually really trust that Google's algorithms do a great job at finding the best ads for people when you have many ads in there. I actually personally have done segmentation before and noticed that across, I've actually seen that mobile example happen before. I've also seen it with geographies as well, where in some locations some ads work better than others. It's hard to pick up on, but it does happen. However, yes, I do trust Google immensely in order to take the ads I have there and figure out the combination that brings the best CTR. But that doesn't serve me as someone who is obsessive and compulsive about my ads, and I'm always on top of my A/B tests, and I need to be constantly testing. So one thing that I commonly do, like in the example that Brad gave, where if you're running Conversion Optimizer, Google won't just let your ads rotate evenly anymore, is open up a new campaign with some of my strongest with some of my strongest keywords, set them at a very standard ad delivery, and they're strong, so I could feed them a lot of impressions, but set them to a standard ad delivery with a limited budget, so they're not completely competing with my main campaigns, but at least I could run very controlled tests there where they are rotating evenly, and I could be free to try wild ideas where if one ad variation completely bombs, it won't hurt my large campaign that's really my bread and butter by bringing down the average CTR for that whole group, whole campaign. So that's actually one way I've gone around it. Once I find that winning ad, I will then drop it into the main campaign with the rest of them. So that's my 3 cents on that.
Yeah. So sometimes I think Google talks about how they wish the world worked, not how it really works, or how it worked if they had all the data in the world, which sometimes they don't quite get there yet. So let's move on. It's just the interest of time here. So we now have responsive ads. You give Google lots and lots of ad assets. They do all kinds of stuff for you and serve the magical ad right over time. So I'm going to skip this, and we're going to do discussion on RSA in a second, right? So when we think about ETAs versus RSAs, number one, we see almost always RSAs blow away ETRs and click-through rate. When it comes to every other metric, they usually lose. Now, this doesn't matter if it's over time. If you just start, like in your first 3 days of data, RSAs may not win anything, but over time, RSAs are actually really good at CTR. We looked across 29 accounts that had at least 100 ad groups with an ETA and an RSA in it, and said, how often does an RSA win CTR versus the RSA win conversion rate? Which means, like in one here, RSAs win CTR 62% of the time. So ETAs win at 38%, right? Everything equals 100. Overall, account-wide, RSAs usually win CTR. They usually lose conversion rate. There's exceptions to this. And so I wanted to know, I'm going to do discussion in a second. I wanted to know why they lost. So we started looking through all the headline data, right? What combinations you can come up with. And started to say, well, how often does headline 3 show, right, for ETAs? And we noticed there's 2 sort of groupings here. right? And so we said, well, why do they have these groupings where these show headline 3s almost never, and these show headline 3s a whole lot? Character limits. There's only so much space Google renders stuff, right? So if you're on a mobile device and you're on, a small pixel screen, you don't see a third headline. If you're on a desktop, you'll often see headline 3s more often, but not always. And so you generally see the shorter your headlines are, the more often you get a third headline. Now, so we got it. Actually, they show description 2s all the time. We'll skip that. So I want to know, well, if headline 3 is being shown so often in these combinations, why are they performing poorly, right, at a lot of times? So we saw ads that when headline 3 was displayed, they did worse than 2 headlines. It's more characters. You would think it's more time for marketers to do stuff. You'd think it'd be better. Turns out it has a lot to do with cohesive messaging. So when you think about ways you can use your third headlines, right? Your headline 1, our assumptions here, right? They're related to ad groups. Our very first screen of the day, right? Headline 1 should be saying, hey, we're relevant. So when we think of headline 2 and 3, we got calls to action, we have benefits, we have features. So we'd see ads with 2 calls to actions in them or 2 features in them. So we labeled and did a huge amount of data, which I will spare you going through the methodology here, to say, actually, what's our time? So say, what are features, which are bullet point lists? What are benefits, which is what you get out of a product, right? So we need to think about this by parts of the funnel. Benefits are why people buy. Features are how we research. Calls to action change throughout the funnel. Actually, that's our feature benefit stuff. Calls to action also change throughout the funnel. Most calls to actions are horrible. Right? If you go into Google and you make a responsive display ad and you go to more options and say select, there are 9 options. 9. Shop now, buy now, call now, and you're probably sick of these calls to actions. Be creative. The call to action is one of the places you can be creative and really stand out in an ad. So we've got our features, our benefits, our calls to action. And so as we move through the funnel, we can always use calls to action, right? But early on, it's not buy. You don't tell someone in the awareness cycle, buy now, right? They're like, no, I don't know what I'm even looking at yet, right? So calls to action work everywhere in the funnel if you use the right type. So then, right, this is where we need to look at the data for a second. Then we said, well, again, I went back to conversion per impression because everyone has this, regardless if they're e-commerce, lead gen, whatever. Said, what combinations of headline 2 and 3, ignoring 1, assuming it's by ad group, win by conversion per impression? Wow, CTA and a benefit, number 1. So what do you want to do? And here's why it's good for you. Number 2 most common winner, call to action and a feature. Wow, call to action is super, super important. Unless you add 2 calls to action in headline 2 and 3. Then suddenly your ads are terrible because you're often saying something twice or they're mixed. That's even worse, right? When one call to action says, shop now, and one says, download our free ebook. Well, what do you want me to do, right? And so this is when we look at RSAs, or that they can be problems, because if you've got 2 features, 2 benefits, 2 calls to action in an RSA, Google's going to try to figure out, hey, what if I serve 2 CTAs? What if I serve 2 benefits, right? And so in ETA, we can actually lay out an ad properly to say, well, we should have a headline, very useful, a benefit call to action, or should we do call to action benefit, right? And see, now headline 3 is not always displayed. This was what makes everything tricky. So your headline 3 should only support your headline 2. In fact, I wish that Google would drop headline 2 and not headline 3, because you want to know how your ad ends, right? What's the last thing we say? What's the end of the sentence, right? You don't know how your sentence ends. And so you have to rely on headline 2 being strong, because it will sometimes end the sentence. But headline 3, you can't make the same claim as you do in headline 2. So headline 3 really needs to support the headline 2. And so this is why RSAs, especially in low volume ad groups, Google can't go through, oh, wrong screen. Google can't go through and make 10,000 combinations when you do 1,000 impressions a month. They can't figure out what to show, right? Which is why hopefully you're paid well to write good ads, right? That's your job as a marketer, is to understand things. So RSAs can be good in that broader match, you're using some true broad match. You want to say, hey, look at us, see our offer, right? Where if you say, hey, this is exactly what we want you to do. We know the landing page. We want you to do X. That's an ETA. You're controlling this. All right, I skipped a few discussion points. So thoughts on ETAs, RSAs, should we use RSAs? Feel free we have some time here to sort of discuss your thoughts on RSAs, ETAs, what to use, what not to use, and of course, anything you disagree with.
Who wants to kick it off?
Okay.
I'm just going to...
Okay, so I agree with a lot of it. I don't like RSA campaigns at all, and actually, I haven't really heavily used them at all, because I do like being in control. I think if you are running something very huge, you should definitely, and you do feel the need to use it, you should definitely still run standard ads for the words that matter the most, because there's always going to be a few keywords that are driving the most of your campaign. So at least manually manage those. And by the way, but it's one thing that I think Brad said is that you're always talking about the combination of benefits and features. That's something that I kind of like to test as individually. So when I first really got into PPC, when I first fell in love with the profession, I first read Perry Marshall's book, which is an intro to AdWords. And then when that wasn't enough for me, I then bought Brad's book. But one thing that Perry Marshall said that really resonated with me is when people are searching for something, they're having an inner dialogue in their mind about what they're looking for. So if someone is searching for, let's say, a Lenovo Yoga laptop, in the back of their mind, they must be thinking, I want something powerful and super portable. Or maybe they're thinking, I want something that's really thin that could fit in my small laptop case. So I would test different benefits, such as speed and portability, or versus fits in small cases. Well, maybe not that exactly, but I'll try to understand what that the headline is easy because the headline reflects a search term, but the benefit, that's where I really try to think what they want, and that's what I experiment with the most, and that doesn't really work well with RSA ads, and I think you lose a lot with it. So who's next?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned very large accounts versus small accounts. For those of you who don't know, Elite tends to skew enterprise, so our clients are 6-7 figure spenders a month, hundreds of thousands to millions of ads, accounts, whatever. So you do a lot of these sort of templated type things because you can't write 10 million ads solo. Maybe you can, but not me. So a lot of what we're doing is congruent with what Brad mentioned. We've tested a lot of RSAs, and I think for me, at least for this point, and this happens a lot with Google products when they're in their infancy, is one of the greatest things about SEM in general is that you can take this information to test other marketing. You don't have to go spend $1 million on print without testing it. You can use this as a way to get information out of your existing text ads and figure out what works for other marketing. Right now, responsive search ad reporting is bad. It's not good. We can't find out what works. We just know that this collection of stuff does something. It's getting better, and I'm sure it will get better in the future. Our data isn't quite as dramatic as Brad. Usually we frankly see a well-collected group of RSAs performs about the same as our self-designed expanded text ads. But I think the thing that we focus on the most, beyond what Brad mentioned, which we as a team love Brad's features versus benefits slide strategy. We stole it, borrowed it. But the big thing to think about when you're putting together responsive search ads is A, that things won't always show together, and B, they are kind of three-card Monty. They'll get moved around and shifted all over the place, and sometimes things will show up one way versus the other. So you can't get away with doing a longer form message. You need to make sure that each individual element stands on its own and adds something to every other element that you write, which when you start adding 15 different headlines and a dozen different description lines can get difficult, but it's important to do. Otherwise, your ads start to make no sense.
Yeah, I think in Nava, so Mark over at WordStream put together some data on RSAs. And I think he said, and I may not have the number right, but I'm pretty close, right? That if you use all the headlines and descriptions in an RSA, there's more than 42,000 ways Google can display that ad. So if you think you even want 100 impressions per time to read that, that's over 4 million impressions, right? Just to get a baseline. So what are your...
It goes back to my feelings on there's a certain threshold where you can tell that something is driving value versus, I don't know, there's not enough data points for any individual combination. I genuinely dislike RSAs for one very specific reason. It's beyond that. It's that Google encourages you not to lock in that human intent with pinning a line. So you actually can give some guidance, but they tell you it's not recommended. And the problem I have with that is that they're actually getting in the way of you allowing your human intelligence, your business acumen, the subtlety that goes into buying personas, what is going into that ad group, and saying, no, we don't want your advice, trust us. And the problem with that is that you came up with those lines. Now, again, if you have no time to do tests, if you have no time to write copy, and you are truly that numbers person, and your role is, let's make sure that the numbers are lining up, that's fine. Just bear in mind that Google's tools from an AI perspective and creating ads from a testing perspective with the A/B tests are coming for those sorts of jobs. So how we can own our roles and evolve with AI so that or if you have a larger account, it saves you time as opposed to replacing us, is that you own your creative messaging and you acknowledge when it makes sense to offload that work and when it makes sense to actually say, no, I'm going to handle this test. It's the same reason why I love DSAs or dynamic search ads, because it teaches me how my people search and what headlines could be interesting. It's a good starting point, but I never let DSA be the full breadwinner. It's the same reason why I would never allow RSAs unless they magically, for whatever reason, allowed human input into the algorithm, and we could actually, I don't know, that would actually be really interesting if you could set certain filters for how RSA worked. But until that day, I genuinely dislike them.
Right. Hey, Joel, do we have any great questions from the audience we should cover before we wrap up? I know I'm throwing you on the spot, right? Last second. And you're still muted, so we can't hear you.
The problem with throwing me on the spot is that I have the Google Hangouts window on the back, and then I have to kind of try to find it. I was actually chatting in YouTube, and we have some interesting questions, but they're kind of not necessarily directly related to this particular webinar. I do actually have some others that came in from other sources, though, if you're interested. How much more time do we have, by the way?
A few minutes.
3 minutes, but we can extend if everyone's down.
Okay. Well, one question is, by the way, how do you evaluate CTR to know if your CTR is good or not when position is a factor? In other words, lower position, CTR is worse. So is there any way, do you have any advice on how you get around that?
I mean, one way is actually quality score, right? So we may throw quality score on the bus all the time, but if you're below average CTR quality score, then you're definitely worse than what you could be. All right. Now, at above average, I never say that's the best we can do, because above average is such a massive range. You can usually still get better. But if you're seeing average or below average quality score expected CTR, then you could be better.
If I'm reading,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, what'd you say, Nava?
No, Aaron was going to go.
If I'm reading between the lines correctly, I'm guessing what this person is asking is how you normalize when you're doing ad tests. So like, if you have rotate evenly, maybe an ad will get penalized or it's new, so it's in a lower position. So CTR will look worse, but that's because it's in position 2.5 instead of 1.8. So then our statistical significance will be poorly weighted.
If that's the question, I can give data behind this one real quick.
Go for it. I will say what my thought would be is similar to Brad's. Like, find out if one of them like yields a punishment, like if one of them has a bad quality score, or if it's just a recency thing. Because if they're both for the same terms in ad groups and one is lower, something's wrong.
Yeah. So we find, right, that assuming you've got, like, say, a week of data, it's not like a yesterday issue, right? That if you've got 2 ads in an ad group, and let's just for illustration say 1.5 and 3, so big differences. If you pause the 1.5, because on a normal scale, 3 would be better than that position, it won't get it, right? It won't move that far up. And if they're more than about 0.2-ish apart from each other, then Google's actually suppressing one due to quality score. And so you shouldn't normally actually normalize CTR for ad tests. Because you don't recapture that position.
Oh, and I think one thing that people need to realize, by the way, is that quality score, like ads have quality score as well. Google only reports quality score on the keyword and the exact match for that keyword, mind you. But what they report, that number that they put next to that keyword is the average quality score for that keyword, which is for the ads in the group and also the search terms that come in. And so what I found actually is if an ad all of a sudden starts with a lower position, especially if it's new, it could be that Google gave it a lower expected CTR. So that ad's quality score ended up being lower from the beginning. So, it's kind of like, it's something to consider. And I wish Google would actually just tell us what that quality score is for those ads. But I think that's kind of what you're explaining. And I felt like I had to clarify that. Quality score.
It's the ad keyword combos. I mean, definitely Google's got a quality score for every keyword, ad, search term, geographic, device, search partner. I'm missing one, intersection.
So and also load time. Like if someone's let's say load time is important. It's binary. It's either good enough or not. But let's say there's some certain geo that you're advertising in, and your landing page load time sucks for whatever technical reason that there is that gives it that. It'll bring down your average slightly, but it'll be very difficult for you to identify that. Which is why I wish Google would report quality score in a more granular level for all these other dimensions.
Oh, God. No, go ahead.
So let Nava jump in here. She's been trying to jump in front. Nava, you go.
Nava's too nice.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
No, you go, Nava.
No, Nava. No, Aaron's muted.
What I was going to say is that a lot of this is also industry dependent. So there are going to be certain industries that will genuinely struggle on bids to rank high enough to get the click-through rate, that it will have the search volume, and therefore may be predisposed to a lower quality score than necessarily the quote-unquote average. The other thing we're thinking about is, do you want to solve the problem of position with bid and throwing more money at the problem, or do you want to solve the issue with structure and how you've actually laid out your ad groups or keywords? And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier around how highly do you want to segment? Are you laying yourself out to get success via time or money? Like, do you have the time to invest in managing this, or do you want to throw money at the problem and maybe opt into smart bidding or smart advertising with RSAs? Yeah. It all comes down to what is going to work for you. So we're talking a lot about the kind of general ideas, general numbers. For individual situations, it does depend on. It comes down to money or time, and if you have the money, great. Bids are how you go for and just get yourself higher ranked. But otherwise, it does pay to look at the structure of your campaign. Have you set yourself up to actually have your ads serve in a way that's reasonable?
Money is time. They're the same thing.
But they're just different commodity. I was going to say they're different currencies. I was going to say commodities.
That's good too. What to Nava's point, if they're the same ad. If they're in the same ad group and they're in the same place and all other elements are the same, it's not it's probably not the bid. It's probably, it's a chicken or egg thing. Every ad starts at a quality score of 6. They all start at average. So if one has a lower position when everything else is the same, it's the ad.
Well, so if you see this problem across a lot of ad groups, do an AA test. Sometimes Google actually just really messes up. And an AA test, and if you do that and you realize that one's in position 1.5 and one's in 4, that's Google really screwing with your ad rotation.
Yeah, and by the way, something interesting I've seen before is I used to do A/B testing by duplicating ads and just having them point to different landing pages, but so sometimes I would see that the new landing page ad combo would just all of a sudden start with a lower position, so I would kind of take a hint that maybe Google doesn't like something in that page that it's seeing for the first time. I do have more questions, by the way. I think once we started wrapping up, people decided to start, letting themselves free and ask more if we have more time.
We can do one more, and then I know I have a meeting in like 10 minutes, but we can do another question.
It's like 8 p.m. for me here, so. Okay, so I have to try to pick one. Okay, well, this is interesting. So Brittany Zer asked about what bid strategies do you use or scripts so that you do not have the rotate setting forced on you. So you have to rotate for higher CTR. And that's actually something I'm curious about. You said Target CPA does that. Are there any other bidding strategies that you could use that wouldn't force that optimized rotation?
So again, this is taking my tinfoil hat back off and going on the side of Google. The reason it does that for a reason. So when you think the way that TCPA works is at an auction time, it looks at every single solitary signal it has, picks the best thing, and goes nuts for it based on expected conversion rate. If you try to script out things like an ad and make sure that it works, then TCPA will lose some of its, or TROWS or whatever, it will lose the signals that it needs to work. So it's like trying to trick a robot. The robot will know and either won't function as it's supposed to or it won't function, period. But what we have seen is a lot of people struggling with rotate evenly, not rotating, or different impression levels. So the one thing that's important to remember for that is rotate evenly doesn't make sure they get the same impression levels. It makes sure that they're entered in the same number of auctions. So if you're rotating evenly and one of them is getting kicked down, then odds are it's losing. It's not winning the auctions that it's being entered in.
I know Google says that, but again, we've seen so many cases where we'll pause the one that's got all the impressions and the one with none of them actually regains them all. And the other thing we saw, not for everybody, right? For some accounts was that when Google switched the ad rotation, their CPAs went up almost 20% in some cases.
For short term or long term?
Long term, right? After 3 weeks, of which they were like, we can't wait any longer to see. So again, that's the robot has the intention, but doesn't always have the make the right decisions. It's the same thing, right? Beef consumption in the U.S. and lightning strikes in the U.S. are identically correlated. They're not causation effects, but a robot looks and says, wow, lightning's hitting more often. Beef sales are about to go up, right? Again, useless information, but this is where they don't have a context. Navi, do you have anything to add here?
One quick little point, and then I know we have to go. Again, taking off, as Aaron put it, the tinfoil hat. I used to be adamantly against automated bidding because I would see it tank accounts. And Google has gotten significantly smarter when it comes to automation. And we are now at a point where if you have, say, 30 conversions in a 30-day period, you technically can see something approaching success. I'm not saying it's going to be wild success, but you can see something approaching success with quote-unquote smart bidding so that target CPA, maximize conversions. Target ROAS still needs a certain threshold or target return on ad spend. Where we think about this in terms of bids and scripting, the only reason you should be turning to a script is you think you can out Google. And if you are going to go down that path, it goes back to that earlier statement of time or money. It is a very rare scripter or tool, and there are tools out there that will try to help you with this. Optimizer is one of them.
That's right.
Go for it. Like go out Google. But for most businesses, your time is better spent and your dollars are better spent on the things that are tied directly to your business. Making sure that the auction prices that you're going after directly align, that the messaging is in line with your brand, and that legal is not going to throw a hissy fit at you because all of a sudden it got served in a way that they didn't approve, which is another reason why.
I will say even with the ad rotation, if CPA bidding is working for us, we still use it and just say it takes longer to ad test. I will say the one issue sometimes with Google's ROAS bidding, though, is it has a very short look back window. So there are many other systems much better at year-over-year seasonality. Google is terrible at that. Aaron, what do you do a lot of e-commerce year-over-year trends? How do you handle those times?
Oh, January 2nd was not very fun this year.
January 2nd is one of the best for me.
Well, the challenge that we ran a lot of larger scale clients using TROAS during December, and Google's seasonality controls exist, but they're still in beta or learning or evolving. So we turn off bid strategies or when we ran out of inventory or shipping cutoff hit or whatever. And then once we got back into the swing of things, we turned things back on in January, and the seasonality controls forgot to control. So it still acted like it was the last week of holiday.
Because bidding's historical. Like bids are set based on, you need statistical confidence in what you're bidding on in order to bid effectively, but you also need what will happen to keep happening. And when there's some big seasonal change, that doesn't happen. Now, see, actually, a lot of what I sell is in the healthcare space, so like related to weight loss and diets and whatnot. So come January 2nd, like everything blows up, and also ad inventory gets cheaper because all the retailers back out and so on. So it's really good for me.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is most bidding platforms, and eventually Google, they'll have what I call blackout days. Mm-hmm. So if you know that Black Friday and Cyber Monday are amazing and they shouldn't be looked at for bidding because they just don't, it's not the same. You can tell it, just don't look at those and look at every other day besides these, or you can have year-over-year periods. But right now, Google's bidding platforms only look at 30 days, and 30 days is not very long.
That's right. So if you're dealing with things, it's good to look at how conversion rates changed over the season exactly a year ago, if you have that data, and act accordingly. Just turn off conversion optimizer, maybe even pause 4th of July if that's it, because it could throw off the algorithms for the upcoming days. But I do find, by the way, that this is less important if it's like a very niche B2B product, and people are searching for it. If people are searching for something that's very niche and it matters for business, they're going to have the same intent regardless of the season because they're actively looking for it, as opposed to something that you're reaching people who are in the awareness stage, something on display, where that's where like emotions and seasons really matter the most.
All right, so we have a recap. The three of you, do you have like some, and I know, Joel, you're going to take us out in a second here, but three of you, do you have you should take this away with you, right? Like this is what you should remember. So of Nava, of all the wonderful things you said today, if someone remembered a single point, what would it be?
Own your star power when it comes to testing. You know more about your business and your profit lines than the Google or Bing or Facebook. We talk about Facebook, but the Facebook machines will ever know. Don't let them wrest that control away from you.
Own the star power. I love that. Joel?
Okay. Actually, one thing I really, when you opened up with talking about differentiating between impression competitors and click competitors, I mean, it's something that I haven't thought about in that way before. I really, 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 really do like that. So I think that's one thing that was very interesting to me. And also, the way you use combined metrics, I found interesting as well. I think that's something that does resonate too.
Aaron?
Speak customer language, not marketer language. Don't look at our best practices. Don't look at a brand guide. Don't look at the words that we want to say. Listen to the customers, what they're saying through their search queries, through click-through rate, through ad testing. Figure out what makes people tick, not what some persona research said.
Yep.
Awesome.
And what makes people tick is what they click on.
All right. So, if you're looking for a good enterprise agency, talk to Aaron. If you're SMB, talk to Nava. If you're looking for a big enterprise, like not necessarily enterprise, but larger spends, look at our software. And Joel, oh, that's the last thing I have. So Joel, do you want to wrap us up?
No, I mean, that's it was really great. I had never had a webinar go 15 minutes over before, but it was totally worth it. I love this conversation. I don't mind keep having it. In Israel, Thursday evening is like Friday night because we don't work on Friday and Saturday. So I don't mind spending the rest of this evening on Twitter. So any other questions, just use hashtag SCMRushLive, and I'll be monitoring it, as I'm sure some of the other people joining me in this will, like Nava, Brad, and Aaron. So it was, really a lot of fun. It was, my pleasure doing this. And I think that's it for the evening. So anything else, SCMRush Live, and you guys know how to reach us on Twitter.
Bye, guys.
Enjoy.
Thanks, everyone.